Hi everyone. In this video, we'll try to understand the proxy design pattern, which is one of the structural design pattern. So before learning the proxy design pattern, we'll try to understand what exactly is a proxy. So proxy is nothing but one intermediate server which lies between the end user and the internet or the website, which is hosted on the internet. Okay. And we are using this proxy server for various advantages. One of that advantage is filtering. So let's say you are one student who is learning in one college, and your college has many computers. Let's say you are working on one of the computer and you try to access one social media website, and once you try to access that website, you see one message that you're not allowed to access that. Why? How this message came? This is because first your request is sent to the proxy server of the college. The proxy server checks whether the website user is trying to access is social media website or not. If it is, then this proxy server will not forward that request to the actual website, actual social media website. Okay. So this was first use case of this proxy server. Talking about the second use case, we can use the proxy server as caching as well. So let's say this is the website which is currently hosted in USA and you are currently living in India. So if you are trying to access that website, then obviously the latency would be high, right? Because the requests will move from India to US. So what we can do is we can use this proxy server as a cache. So we'll have this proxy server in India. Okay, we'll create one proxy server in India, and let's say this is the first user who tries to access this HTML page. So the request will first move to the proxy server. The proxy server will not have the HTML page for the first time. Then, so the proxy server will forward the request to this particular website. Okay, this website will return the HTML page and it will be saved into this proxy server, right? And this proxy server will return the HTML page to the user so that you can see that HTML page. Okay, now if there is another user who is trying to access the same HTML page, then the request from that user will first go to the proxy server, and the proxy server will see that we already have the HTML page, so we will directly return that to this particular user. So the latency has now reduced because this user will not make a request from India to USA. Instead, it is making one request from India to India. Okay. And that's the second advantage of using the proxy server. Similarly, we can have many more advantage. If I have to highlight one more, then it's nothing but logging. So we can use the proxy server for logging as well. Like let's say you are trying to access this website. So I can log one message over here in the proxy server. So I can perform various analytics later on. Okay. So these are the advantages of using the proxy server. So now that we have brief idea about proxy, so let's see the definition of proxy design pattern. So this is the definition. The definition says that the proxy design pattern is a structural design pattern where you can perform something before or after the request reaches the receiver. So see, these users are nothing but the sender. So we can have normal user or the admin. And this user service is nothing but the receiver. Okay, so these are the senders and this is the receiver. And this is the database where user data is stored. So what user service can do is it can fetch the user data from the user database, and it can also delete the user data from the user database. I don't want to allow the normal user to call this particular function, which is delete user. So what I can do is I can use proxy, and this proxy will filter the requests coming from user if the request is going to the delete user. So in other words, if the normal user is trying to call this delete user function, then we will filter that out. We will only allow the admin to call this delete user function. So over here, we are performing the filtering logic before the request reaches the receiver. Okay. So this was one of the example. The second example is related to caching. So this is the client code. You can say that this is main class, and this is the user service class. Okay. And this user service class interacts with the user database and fetches the user data based on the ID. So assume that this client code wants some user data. So it will first request to the user service. User service will fetch the data for that ID, and it will return the data to the client. While returning the data, we would save that data into this hash map, so that for further requests for the same user, we don't have to interact with the database. Instead, we will just fetch that from the map, which is stored in memory. Okay. So over here, we are performing caching after the request reaches the receiver, right? So I hope now you understand what is proxy design pattern and the use cases for proxy design pattern. Now coming to the class diagram or UML diagram. So in UML diagram, we have one user service interface. Okay. And it will have certain contracts like get user, delete user, etc. So the implementation class will implement the functions which are mentioned over here. That is get user and delete user. So this arrow is nothing but implementation. So it means that user service implementation implements the user service. Okay. Now we also have this proxy, right? Between the sender and the receiver, we have something called as proxy. This proxy is also implementing the user service interface. Why? It is implementing the user service interface because this proxy has to imitate the user service implementation. So if in future, if I want to add, let's say, third function called as XYZ, then obviously this proxy should also have that function XYZ, because then only we will be able to forward that request, because the client is thinking that it is interacting with the user service implementation, but instead it is interacting with the proxy. So whatever functions are present in user service implementation should be there in the user service proxy. And that's the reason why we are making this proxy implement the user service interface. Okay. So this is the implementation arrow. And this arrow represents the has a relationship, because this proxy will have one object of user service implementation. And since it has this object, that's the reason why we are able to forward the request from proxy to the user service implementation. So if the client calls get user function, okay, so in this particular get user, we will call the user service implementation's get user function. And this is possible because we have the object of user service implementation in the proxy. So I hope now you understood the UML diagram as well. So now let's check out the code for this particular example. So let's check out the code. So we have one user class where each user would have one name and one role assigned to them. So the role are of, there are two types of role. First is admin and second is a normal user. And we have this user interface, user service interface, which has two functions. that is get user and delete user. And we have the user service implementation. This user service implementation is nothing but the receiver, whereas this main class is nothing but the sender. Okay. So this user service implementation will implement the get user and delete user because it will implement the user service interface. Okay. And talking about the proxy, this proxy also implements the user service interface. So it will implement the get user function and delete user function. And in the delete user function, what we are doing is we are checking whether the caller is an admin or not. If the caller is admin, then only we are forwarding that request to the real service. By real service, we mean that the user service implementation. Okay. Over here as well, here we are not checking or filtering the user based on the roles, because here we don't want that filtering logic. We are directly forwarding that request to the real service, and we are injecting that real service through the constructor using the constructor based injection. Okay. So coming to the main class, in the main class, I have created admin, user, and the target user which we want to delete. Here we have created the real service, which is nothing but the receiver. So this main class is the sender and this is the receiver. And between the sender and the receiver, we have this proxy. So we are creating the proxy, and within that proxy, we are injecting the real service so that this proxy can forward the request to the real service. Okay. Now I am calling the get user and delete user function, and currently I am calling that functions as an admin. Okay. And afterwards I am calling that functions as a normal user. So now let's run the code and check which of the 4 functions will be executed successfully. So here we can see that admin is able to fetch and delete the user, and a normal user is only able to fetch the target user, but it is not able to delete the target user because we have used the filtering logic in the proxy. Right. So now I hope you have understood everything related to proxy design pattern. If you did, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thanks.